This is Focus KSA, and they can refer to our archives at susris.com/Focus KSA for all the background on this topic and many others in the archives from previous webinars. Ambassador, we're currently looking at a number of crises that have emerged in recent days and weeks. The situation in the Middle East peace process, which broke down and now has emerged into a violent confrontation in Gaza and the West Bank. Alarmingly, we're looking at the situation in Iraq, where ISIS, which had been involved in Syria in the civil war with the Assad regime, has now broken across wide parts of the Iraqi landscape. Last week we saw attacks at the southern border of Saudi Arabia with presumably Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula militants attacking the Saudi border posts and taking hostages and killing some people there. As if all those things are not enough, we have Saudi Arabia's concern with the political developments in Egypt, and obviously the situation with Iran is reaching another milestone point with the P5+1 meeting as we speak to iron out a final agreement on the nuclear deal with Iran and the potential consequences of either success or failure of that effort. We're looking at a July 20th deadline. So with all of those things on the plate, we'll let you pick and choose which you'd like to comment on and inform our audience with your perspective as a diplomat and a career military man who understands the regional dynamics in terms of defense and security issues as well as the diplomacy.
Well, when you list all of those things, then you go, oh my goodness. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the middle of all that. Well, Saudi Arabia's in the middle of all of that. And very often I thought in my time that there's a disconnect in thinking in our governments, not because our government was right or their government was right, but you see the problem differently when you're in the middle of it. And from 10,000 miles away, we can be very objective about things. It's difficult when you're surrounded, you're in a maelstrom, and you're trying to bring some order to all of this. To their credit, Saudi Arabia over the last decade has focused a lot of time and attention on the border areas, both the northern and southern border. I think that they are as well positioned as any country that I know of protecting their border. But let me click through them. Iran was the source of a lot of angst between our governments, and I think in large part because we were not doing a good job of communicating. And that was, I think, necessary, or we felt it was necessary because of the very difficult negotiations going on. I don't have any inside information here, but my suggest is there is a real window of opportunity for the simple reason that nothing has been made public. If the two sides, if the P5+1 and Iran were at odds with each other, you would have seen some public sniping, and that has not gone on. The information I'm hearing is within the government in Iran, there is an understanding that, well, we've tried everything else for 40 years and it hasn't worked. Let's try something different. So there is energy on their part to conclude an agreement. There certainly is energy on our part to conclude an agreement, but that's not the end result. We can't just sign a nuclear agreement and walk away. It has to be an enforceable agreement, and we have to commit ourselves to be part of the enforcing. I think the challenge on the negotiations from Iran's perspective is that they have created this program as a national program, not unlike what we did in the space program in the 60s. So it has broad public support. The sensitivity in the negotiations is not just between Iran and the P5+1, but it has to be approached in a way that they can sell to their own population. So if they want to climb down from the limb, we've got to help to give them a ladder to do that, if that's what they want to do. And the answer that they gave in to sanctions is probably not sophisticated enough for them to be able to do that. So when I look at the delicate negotiations going on, you have to find a solution which is win-win for both sides. This cannot be a winner and a loser, and the outcome of this from Iran has to be the opportunity to bring themselves into the community of nations in the Gulf in a positive way. And if they're looking at making that move, then it could be a very successful effort. It can't be just binary, that we sign an agreement and ease sanctions, and then Iran continues the strategy of destabilization. So on that, we've got ISIS, the Islamic State, formerly known as ISIS, which has declared its independence in western Syria and Iraq. This is a bit of a monster that a lot of people help give rise to. And if you look at it, you got to ask yourself, why would Iran be interested in this? This is a hostile, murderous Sunni insurgent group. Why in the world would Iran want to be a part of that? I'm not so sure that we haven't, if ISIS hasn't created a synergy that all of the players in the region, including Iran, are taking a step back and saying, look what has been created. It's also pretty obvious that some of the concerns that the Saudis had with Maliki and the formation of his government and the governance model have actually proven to be more correct than at times our government wanted to admit. And at the end of the day, the answer in Baghdad is the formation of an inclusive government that embraces minority representation and allows all of the disparate parties in Iraq to be represented in the governance process. And if Maliki is willing to make that step, then that would be the first step toward bringing order. If he's not willing to make that step, or if his successor is not willing to make that step, then it does not look optimistic. You're right about Al-Qaeda. In Yemen, we continue to be focused with the Saudi government on a very close partnership on that one. Egypt, I think our government is beginning, our government has in place what looks to be a process to re-engage with Egypt on a positive basis. You know, we said early on that if they went through the constitutional reform, presidential elections, and parliamentary elections, then that would be the opportunity for us to reestablish relationships on a positive footing. I hope that happens. We desperately need Egypt as an ally. We desperately need to be engaged with them. And if you just look at the geostrategic piece, it is the insurgency going on in the Sinai that creates the biggest threat to our other key ally in the region, Israel. So they need Apaches, they need capability to go after this. And if the government in Egypt is willing to do that, we should be a part of that solution. I do not believe stability and modernization are mutually exclusive terms. I believe that you've got to have some semblance of stability before you move forward. And with that, I think Egypt, al-Sisi has done what is necessary to focus on stability. The key is economic development. It's got to be more than just an austerity plan, because the austerity plan really impacts low and middle income. We're looking at a restructure of the economy and bringing in IMF and taking advantage of the generosity of the Gulf states to really put an economy on a footing. But you got to have stability if you're going to reattract the tourism industry, because at the end of the day, that's probably the best opportunity for foreign investment in Egypt. So it is a bit of a challenge in the region right now.
To be sure. Let me ask one question related to both business. You talked about trade investment and also the strategic situation. We spoke recently with Dr. Theodore Karasik from Enigma in Dubai, and he had written a piece about the Russian involvement in the strategic developments in the region, and perhaps an evolving new relationship between Riyadh and Moscow. And clearly there's a lot of Chinese interest in trade investment in the Gulf, especially in the kingdom. Can you comment on the strategic, political, and business and finance levels of the influence both from Russia and China in what you see as the evolving nature of the U.S.-Saudi relationship and developments in the kingdom?
Yeah, Pat, a lot of people see this as a competitive event. And in business, a win for Russia is a loss for us, and I don't see it that way. I think that there's room for all. I believe that the U.S.-Russia-China relationship is as important for stability and progress in the region as any. And I'll go back to the Yemen transition in 2010 to 2011. Abdul Latif al-Zahani, who's the Secretary General of the GCC, showed great leadership and actually personal courage in driving that evolution and transition. Supporting him was an American ambassador who did incredible work in making that a reality. There were 6 ambassadors in Sana'a that were a part of this, and they included the Russian and the Chinese ambassador. So in the Yemen transition, we were all together, working together on a template for transition, which at the end of the day thought would be the template that would be applied to the rest of the region as we went through the turmoil of the Arab Spring. And it was a template that focused on bringing the opposition together, that focused on the needs of the people, and not focused on the individual at the top. And we were very successful in that, and I thought it was a model. When we then moved to Libya, and the Saudis and the other Gulf states were firmly behind the no-fly zone. The idea of the no-fly zone was to protect the people of Libya from the army. It was not about change of government. And this is a key point for Russia and China. That what happened was the no-fly zone then went to a kinetic operation. The kinetic operation then transitioned to a downfall of Gaddafi and the focus. This was clearly off track from what they had been a central part of in the Yemeni transition. I don't think any of us at the time saw that disconnect. But then when Syria came, Russia and China saw Syria as a Libya model, not as a Yemen model. At the end of the day, if we're going to have success in Syria or anywhere else, we need to bring together our diplomatic capacity with that of Russia and Lavrov and with China, so that we're working together toward stability and moving forward. Isolating them from the process, I do not think is any of our best interests. So I'm actually encouraged that Russia is kind of coming back. They've got a long tradition in the region. If you've ever been to Sharm el-Sheikh, you'll notice that all the signs are in Arabic and Russian because a long tradition of tourists coming from Russia there. I think it's necessary that in time we rebuild that bridge and we do this together.
Let's loop back briefly to Iran and what is characterized as a possible rapprochement between Washington and Tehran, but also criticism in the Gulf, especially in Saudi Arabia, about the new American hugging and kissing with Iran. We've had public and private commentary to the effect that Saudis are concerned about a new relationship between Iran and the United States. And we have a question from Jill Pagels, who is an educator at KAUST, who asked, where do you anticipate the most resistance to come from, a nation or a group, as Iran tries to integrate?
Well, that's a good question. I think the first thing we're going to have to find out is Iran really looking to integrate. We know that they're looking to do we have the possibility of P5+1. By the way, the July 20th deadline is not a deadline. The original construct for the negotiations was a built-in agreement for option for a 6-month extension.
Right. It was kind of a sunset, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
The sun would come out the next day.
Yeah, I think you're looking at probably less than 40% chance of an agreement being signed by the 20th of July, but better than 80% chance that the negotiations would continue. I think there's goodwill on both sides to come to an agreement. I think the negotiations, for reasons I mentioned earlier, are very, very sensitive, and it's got to be worked through in a way that allows both sides to see success in it. The challenge in Iran will be the takeover by Republican Guards Corps, and whether or not you see a elected government that has the latitude to integrate to the rest of the region, and a focus away from a strategy of destabilization into a strategy of integration. I don't know, but that will be the key determinant as to whether or not Iran is going to be a peaceful and contributing member of the Gulf region. The Saudis, if you don't talk to them, they will come up with all sorts of conclusions on their own. I used to tease them about having a rumor generation plant somewhere in Riyadh that just starts these things. But basically the line goes something like this, that we're going to sign an agreement with Iran. It will not be enforceable. It's taqiyya in its greatest form. And we will sign that and then leave the region and leave the Saudis and the Emiratis to deal with it. Leave a void in the Gulf like we did in Iraq in 2003. I don't think that's going to happen because we're not leaving the region. This pivot to Asia is very much overstated. I remind people that if you've played basketball, you know that a pivot means you keep one foot in place. while the other one moves around. And I think the foot that stays in place, the toes are in Poland and the heels are in the Gulf. We've got a commitment to that part of the world that's not going to go away. The issue about a relationship with Iran is intriguing, because up until 1979 we had a healthy relationship with Iran and Saudi Arabia, and both sides were comfortable with that. At different times over the last 40 years, Saudi Arabia has had, if not warm, certainly a workable relationship with Iran. Hashemi days, for example, they had a very workable relationship. Again, I don't think it's binary. I think the United States could easily have a positive relationship with both. I do not see this warming as a rapprochement with Iran for some time. There's a lot of confidence measures over time that have to be developed and matured. So at the end of the day, our key relationship with the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Bahrain with the fleet, Qatar with AFCENT, our relationship with Kuwait and our Army footprint there, we're going to be have a key presence in the region for some time.
I think alongside the rumor generation plant in Riyadh is the speculation generation plant in Washington, dealing with the prospects for Prince Bandar. We've recently seen him announced as the special advisor to the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Abdullah, along with the movement of Prince Khalid bin Bandar from the Deputy Defense Minister position to Chief of Intelligence. Without getting into any one specific move, the question of who's in leadership positions is important to people who follow U.S.-Saudi relations. Can you comment just in general terms, though, as someone who's been in Riyadh and followed these developments of who's in what position and how the pieces are moved around the table in terms of prospects for leaders to emerge, and everyone is talking about succession in connection with leadership. What are your thoughts on those thorny issues?
I'm mindful of Robert Lacey's advice in the Kingdom, where he said very succinctly on the issue of secession, those that know don't talk, those that talk don't know. It really unwise to speculate. This is inside the family. You've got a royal family that is deeply committed to the modernization of the country, that knows the kinds of things that have to be done to modernize and make the kingdom successful over the long term. You've got an incredible talent base. I mentioned Khalid al-Faisal, his brother Saad al-Faisal. These are some of the most talented people you'll meet in life. I watched what was going on with Khalid bin Bandar, and I was very glad to see him appointed as the head of GIP. Prince Khalid is maybe the most talented military army person in the kingdom. He fought in the Gulf War. He was the head of the army. He did a wonderful job those few years that he was the Emir of Riyadh. Someone that's very well respected. Someone who needed to be at the minister level in Saudi Arabia and as the head of intelligence, with the challenges they've got on their bordering states. That really is the perfect position for him. Traditionally, the Deputy Minister of Defense has been an administrative position, not a power position. Salman bin Sultan was really working to energize the Ministry of Defense and had given more visibility to the position than had existed in decades. I truly think that Prince Khalid is in a better place now at GIP because as the head of GIP, that's an extremely important position to the king, the Rol Diwan, and the country. So I see that as a positive. Prince Bandar has been the head of their National Security Council. Doesn't function quite the way our NSC does, but nonetheless, he has held on to that portfolio. And as an advisor to the king, he is in a position to go do those things, especially in the international front, that the leadership of the country needs to be done. But as most people know, Prince Bandar is a unique individual that he's wonderful to watch. So I think the moves that are going on make sense in terms of if you look at the individual moves and their value. Prince Turki has done a wonderful job as the deputy governor of Riyadh. Fleeting him up to be the governor makes sense. General Aish coming back into the Ministry of Defense brings a wealth of knowledge and experience that I think is it's important to bring him back. So I actually look at the landscape and see that you're putting people in positions for long-term stability in the bureaucracy.
We're woefully over our 1 hour timeline here, and I appreciate your indulgence of running over because we've had so many great things to talk to you about. I'll remind our audience this is Focus KSA, a joint project of the SUSRIS.com and Saudi U.S. Trade Group, sustig.org. We appreciate your participation today, and Ambassador, we thank you once again for your time with us. We'll just pose one or two more questions to you, and then let you go to that wonderful New Hampshire summertime day that it looks like you're having up there. We talked briefly before we kicked off the broadcast about being ambassador in Saudi Arabia, and you mentioned having had an opportunity to meet with your successor. There was a brief gap there before his nomination was approved, but you talked about Ambassador Westphal having met him. But then in general terms, the nature of succession among America's top diplomats in the kingdom and the collegial nature of the relationship. Can you give us just a thumbnail of your experience as an ambassador and what it means to be able to pick up the phone and talk to your predecessors, and I'm sure Ambassador Westphal, hopefully we'll have him join us for one of our sessions and can pick his thoughts separately, but just the whole notion of what it means to be in such a small group of diplomatic professionals.
Yeah, I met with every ambassador going back 25 years before I went to Riyadh. And what I found was it's a unique alumni group. And there's no partisan politics or thinking at all. Every former ambassador wants you to be successful. They realize that you're there at a time that they are not there. And is again a very collegial group. And as a group, what I found, they wanted me to be successful. And they wanted the legacy of former ambassadors of the kingdom to be one supportive of the guy that's there. And you will find me being Joe Westphal's biggest supporter because we definitely want him to be successful. In my 4 years, I never had a former ambassador second guess what I was doing. I would often seek them out, and they were always very helpful and insightful and thoughtful. So it's a collection of, I think, very professional, humble people who care about Saudi Arabia. and want the person in place there to be successful.
Any thoughts on the role and position of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Abdullah, who has been a remarkable transformative figure in modern Saudi Arabia and unique among world leaders, and not just his own country, but in the region and on the global scene. And you had 4 years of watching him up close. And any thoughts on his role in Saudi modernization and reform?
I don't think you can talk about reform in Saudi Arabia without starting on a conversation about King Abdullah. He has been at the forefront of all of these creative things to point the kingdom in the direction of success. The frustration is not with his creative thinking. The frustration is with the bureaucracy that doesn't always follow through.
That sounds familiar among leaders.
Yeah. There was a song years ago of Baba Abdullah, Father Abdullah. And to a very large degree, that's the way the Saudis see him, very much as a father figure. And if you're around him very much, you can understand where that affection comes from. He's always had a capacity to reach out to his people. He sees his role as destiny. It was his destiny to be the king of Saudi Arabia and to serve. He quotes his father, Abdulaziz, and I'm a river to my people. There is nothing about him that speaks of the position, but always about the responsibility. And I think one of the reasons that Saudi Arabia came through the crisis of 2011 was his connection with the people and his capacity to understand what their needs were, and his ability to drive a response that was responsive to the needs of his people, as opposed to defaulting on a traditional role of cracking down on dissent. I have great admiration for King Abdullah.
Thank you for that, and we're going to close out just reminding our audience this is the Focus KSA webinar that we bring you every month. We're going to take a hiatus in August, so you won't see us in the Focus KSA role until September. Although we will be bringing special editions of Focus KSA as we've done in recent weeks, talking specifically about the crisis in Iraq. And with all the developments that we've touched on today, I suspect that there may be a special edition or two. So please stay on the mailing list for those announcements through SUSRIS.com and the SaudiUSTradeGroup.org. Last question for Ambassador Smith. As the American chief diplomat in Riyadh, you've seen a lot of things that Americans have no clue, and you gave a wonderful reminiscence of your time in Saudi Arabia at the Business Opportunities Forum in Los Angeles. Can you share just a brief snapshot of what Saudi Arabia is all about for Americans who scratch their heads and wonder about some of the press reports and the things they read and see in the news that you know to be different?
Well, it's a culture that's completely different from ours. That doesn't mean that the people are different. We've met friends for a lifetime. Actually, the best piece of advice that I was given before I went over was from Wyche Fowler, who had been the senator from Georgia. And his advice was, Saudis are Southern, just slow down and enjoy their company. Everything else will work out. there's great truth to that. American business have a great competitive advantage because Saudis want a long-term relationship. They don't want to buy something cheap. They want a business relationship for the long term. That's why they send their sons and daughters to school over here. So despite the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, the reality of it is if you're going to be involved in diplomacy, you actually have to like people. And I found the Saudis among the most generous, most hospitable, warmest people that I'd ever met.
Well, that's a great close. Ambassador Smith, thank you again so much for joining us for Focus KSA today, and thank you to the members of our audience for participating. We appreciate it, and we look forward to the next session of Focus KSA. Thanks, and everybody have a great day.